Hi, I'm Rigger. This is Your Right, and today it's time for a training arc. Before that though, be sure to like the video if you like it, share anything else you would like it, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and subscribe if you want to see more. So, when I made my timeskip video, I titled it saying it was discussing everything about a timeskip. However, there was an option I actually neglected, and the comments brought it up quite a bit. And that is the option that it's actually on the island where time passes at a much slower rate. They spend a lot more time on the island than actually passes in Remnant. Lots of people like the idea of them as the main team getting stronger and growing on the island together before returning to Remnant, where they can be a lot more effective and where not much time has passed. And then, logically, they get involved with the events in Vacuo that would soon be happening or are in the middle of happening. There's certainly a logic to that, and far be it for me to dismiss a possibility. I initially stated that if they were doing the time differential, it would be that more time passes on Remnant. And honestly, I stand by that. I still think that's what will happen, if they're doing it at all. I'll say from the start that I still wholeheartedly believe that this way won't happen due to a variety of factors. But that sort of doesn't matter. In the end, there's no reason to dismiss the possibility outright without explaining why. Because I can be wrong, of course I can, and even if I'm not, it's still interesting to discuss anyway. So that's what we'll do. We'll go over the ideas and why I don't think it's gonna happen. Before we start though, I will say, side note, this is one of those things that makes making these videos hard, because I did have all these thoughts beforehand, but I didn't put them in that video. I cut it down for time because it seemed like it very obviously wasn't gonna happen, so it would just have wasted everyone's time to go through it, or I felt like. And obviously when I can edit a script down, it makes the video length much more manageable for people to watch, it makes the video easier to edit so I can actually have the video out, etc. But that's neither here nor there, we get a whole extra video out of it now, because we'll go into it here. Yes, the Hyperbolic Time Island. What do I mean by that? Well, if you don't know, you're uneducated, need to brush up on some DBZ, man. But yeah, it's just like in Dragon Ball, the Hyperbolic Time Chamber. Time is passing a lot slower here, so we can squeeze in a lot of training in a little bit of time in the real world. In DBZ, time passes a lot more drastically. 1 day in the real world is 1 year in the chamber. So you go in the chamber, you bump up those power levels by training, and only a day passes when you come back out. If we run with that concept, it's much easier to understand what we're talking about, though the time differential can be whatever you want. No one's saying it's going to be a year for a day specifically in RWBY. In the real world, they could be gone for a day, a week, a month, a year. On the island, they could do 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, who knows. There's no way to predict that. No hidden mathematical clues you can find. So heading into this concept, what we need to focus on most is what we need to focus on with any situation. What do we stand to gain? What is the strength of this option? If we're picking from any of the options timeline-wise we can make, why are we picking this one? This is where I immediately run into my first issue with doing this in RWBY. For DBZ, the point was for them to train for battle, to get a year of training in a day. But those guys are Super Saiyans and aliens who are beefing themselves up to reach new power levels to go and punch up and ki blast fight the big bad guy. We're not really in that situation. By which I mean, our story doesn't really work on those mechanics. We're very different here in RWBY. We'll start at the beginning so I can explain myself. What I saw a lot of was the idea that the team gets extra time to train and become better, and then they come out and they can help beat the bad guys. That makes sense on paper. And you can point to, specifically, that's why Team RWBY is down here and Jean, because Jean is basically the alternate main character. So if they were the ones to move ahead leaps and bounds battle-wise, it would make sense. The others aren't as important to main storyline combats. If you want satisfying fights with the bad guys, it's gotta be RWBY and Jean and the rest of Team RWBY to go along with them. That's sort of how it works, you know, protagonists and all of that. And again, the same thing happened in DBZ. Not every single character went into the chamber. It's mostly just our key players and like one side character here or there, so that it doesn't dominate everything. It's just the people we know we're gonna need for the big fights that are actually, you know, story. No one was looking to Krillin to go and train up to beat Cell. It's just not relevant for the story and wouldn't happen. So definitely the characters are right for this situation. So if there's going to be a training arc for them, where can we gain years of experience without years of passing in reality? Well, now you have the perfect setup. They're all separated. Except, here's my counter. Why? Like, why would we do that with the RWBY characters? The answer seems obvious, because we have to beat the bad guys, but you can't. Sure, Neo's a badass and training against her will make them more better, absolutely. Maybe this will help them beat people like Mercury and stand up to people like Tyrion. But in the end, that's pointless. Other people can beat them. Mercury isn't invincible, you could beat them as a group or even get lucky. Crow still needs a showdown with Tyrion and he's on his level. Other people are on Tyrion's level, he's just at a very high level. And nothing they gain skill-wise will ever match up to someone like Cinder, and that's kind of the point. You can actually compare Cinder to Cell. She got stronger by by absorbing the powers of other people. That's exactly what Cell did. But our characters aren't Goku and Gohan and Vegeta. They're not Super Saiyan. They're not people who get Zenkai boosts and get immensely stronger to new levels. They're not going to suddenly level up to have equal power to a Maiden. They could all level up to be equal with Crow, but Crow would still get stomped by Cinder. You see the disparity here. It's not something they can work on. A Maiden simply has magic. They have a power source the others do not have access to. You could say the team can come here then to learn magic or gain the ability to use magic. Okay, fine. So you make them more mini Maidens, but that's a fetch quest, not a training arc, and it'd really tip the balance of the story and be not much of a challenge anymore, and it'd be pretty boring to watch. If Jean is going to get Excalibur or something, that's cool, or the equivalent of. That's fine for him. Get a magic weapon or a cool tool you can bring back and stuff to fight with. Perfectly fine. But that's all. If you can fend off Cinder's attacks, that's one thing, but if you can match her in combat with magic, that's another, and that shouldn't be happening. They can make their semblances as strong and powerful and as evolved as they'd like. It should never equal the magic of Maidens. That's a story element. Fighting her means nothing. The boss fights will be easier on the regular people, but that means nothing for our big villains. You can beat Tyrion, okay, you still can't beat Cinder, and you definitely still can't beat Salem, because you literally can't beat her. That's the point. People just want for them to get better in general because they're not really satisfied with where they are. They want them to go back to using team attacks and more team tactics, and that sounds great. And also especially for Jean to be more competent, which is great, but he is getting a lot better, and he didn't lose because of a lack of skill. But at the end of the day, if he did that, if they got incredibly good at working as a team, they would get to show it off by destroying a mob of Grimm. That's where it's gonna really matter, and that doesn't really matter at this point. And if they are at the level where they can fight a Tyrion or a Neo and just walk through them and kill them, well, that might make for a cool shot, but it's not really very fun, and it kind of takes the struggle out of the uphill climb of the story. They're suddenly OP. That's not a story, that's kind of boring. And they still get stomped by the people who are at levels they just can't reach. What you're here for in the combat is the struggle. And as for Cinder, we have maidens who can help fight her. There are other answers than just our heroes have to become godlike to beat her. Yes, absolutely level so that Jean can face her in a sword fight, that's fine. But him finding Ascended Super Saiyan 2 is a bit much, and if that's the whole reason we're here, it seems very narrow. I want to be clear, he can still get better, but he can do that anyway. In general, they get better at fighting on the island, okay, but they do that all the time. They're constantly getting slowly better, or at least in story they are. Whether you agree with what you see on screen or not is up to you. So all of that kind of removes the point of going on a training arc, because there's not a level they can train to that's technically achievable at all, really. Because no matter how good they are, they shouldn't be able to match people like Cinder. She's that powerful for a reason. There's a reason they have things like Silver Eyes to counter her. There's a reason they have other maidens, because they need the help. And that's actually the lesson. Yes, it would be nice for Jean to be able to match Cinder in a fight at the end, but he shouldn't be able to completely match her one-on-one alone. One of the points of Pyrrha's death is that despite it being a huge sacrifice and very sad, and she was noble for doing it, she was also kind of wrong to do it, or at least she knew she was going to die because you can't beat her like that. Jean should learn that you can't beat her like that. Look what happens when you try. You fail, you die, you lose. That's not the answer to this problem. And then there's other issues, like how we represent their growth visually on screen. In DBZ we have that with the Super Saiyan levels. You can see how far they've progressed. Without words, you can just do it with the power of visual storytelling. Semblances don't have that. They're not constantly present, we don't constantly see them, and their power level's growing. So that isn't easy to do without constant fights where they just demonstrate it, and that's a lot of work for not a lot of gain for a show. So, to me at least, gaining a big upgrade in combat is not really a viable reason to do it this way, because we don't get much out of it. So we move on to the next possible thing, which is character growth, of course. Rather than getting more power levels, our main focus is instead on these people growing as people. And here, of course, we have some potential. As far as passage of time, you can show that with character change, like RWBY getting taller and people's hair getting longer. But that also feeds into how long we're saying they're here. Are they here for a year? It's going to be more subtle. If they're here for 5 years, well, that's way more extreme. Obviously, hair grows a lot faster than that in real life, but we are talking about an animated show here. You got to be more dramatic and bigger with those changes to show passage of time. But also you could do visual behavior. Visual behavior is a big storytelling thing you can use a lot. As far as saying you want to see characters grow socially, what you're actually really saying is you just want Blake and Yang to have a year or so of a romantic getaway on a fun island. I can understand why you want to see that, but that shouldn't be the whole reason why we're here. But you can achieve that idea that they've grown together as a couple pretty visually. Simply having them making more contact, acting more like a couple. Kisses on the cheek at the end of conversations, casual little moments of affection, arms around each other when they're just standing around, etc. All that's very good. But what do we do with everyone else? People say they want RWBY to get better, like as a leader, but in what way? The whole decision-making issue, sure, maybe that'll come up here. But in combat as a leader, the show considers her to be fine, even if you don't. And in one-on-one combat, she could get better, but so could they all, and we've covered that, and sure, they can a little bit. Honestly, while they're here, they really just have Neo to overcome, plus whatever's here naturally, and to find a way out. And the other option I've discussed before is if you wanted to start a relationship with RWBY, with take your pick. Again, sure, we can do that, but it's not really enough to be the focus this season either if the whole thing is going to just be relationships. And yeah, we can have moments of conflict. People seem really invested in the idea of conflict between RWBY and Jean over Penny, although I don't really buy into that. To me, it seems a little extreme that it would be much more than a moment of an issue outside of sadness. You know, a minor conflict, because the loss of Penny is horrible and saddening, of course, but I don't think she would blame Jean that much. Given the situation, there'd be no reason for her to blame him much. She literally asked for it and it made sense and it was her decision. He was just the one that had to do it. And also there's no reason to think that Jean would be lying about any of it, especially if he told her what happened, because why would he? He has no reason to lie to them, or any reason for them to suspect he would. There's absolutely the chance that Jean could blame himself and hate himself and almost invite RWBY to be mad at him. But also in the end, where do we take this whole conflict? Do you want them to fight with weapons? Because that doesn't do much, and at the end of the day we need to all work together to go home, so we need them all to come back together as a unit. So knowing that that's going to happen eventually because it has to, what does this argument and conflict get us by the other end? What have the characters gained and changed since they have to come back together to leave anyway? What is it that needs to change between them that this fight would bring out, except for perhaps romantic feelings if you wanted that through sadness and bonding? That could be a thing, but that wouldn't need the conflict part anyway, even if they were going to do it, which seems unlikely. The only other big thing could be development with Neo, getting Neo on side perhaps. That for sure would be a big bonus to the team. That would be an achievement that they come out at the other end and are better for, because they have someone that powerful on their side. That could be really worthwhile and something worth exploring. Plus, Neo being involved in any way that isn't just as an antagonist is what we all really want, because otherwise it'd be such a waste. Another thing brought up also is seeing the dead here. We've talked a lot about that. That's also nice. You could do one of those things where the people on the team actually live alongside the dead for an extended period of time. If you're doing that, time takes a long time to pass here, so they're here for a year or more. Jean makes a little life with Pyrrha, like they're living together. Perhaps RWBY meets her mum, she talks with Summer. That could be something. They could have to then tear themselves away at the end and leave, having to give up this happiness they've enjoyed for an extended period of time. That would be heartbreaking. But also, you can achieve the similar levels of pain and growth with a brief interaction, knowing that they can't stay anyway. It doesn't have to be years for that to work. I do admit, though, it would be interesting to see them living their fantasies almost, living with the people they've lost. The way you'd achieve that in story is give them a way out that's absolutely solid, but it only works on a time cycle. Like the crew learns they can absolutely go home, but not for 2 years, because that's when the stars align and the portal opens or whatever, just make it up, whatever they want to say. Then it really hurts when that time's coming around, because they have to then deal with leaving it. I think that's great torture for the characters, but again, I'm not sure what you get out of it. And you come back to the complaint of Team RWBY sitting around, because it would be an excuse for Team RWBY to sit around, and people got mad when they did that in the mansion, they got mad when they did that at the house in 5, so inviting that to happen again might not satisfy a lot of people. There is the opportunity for personal growth in that situation though, for sure. Perhaps RWBY learning some harsh lessons and some insight from her mother, Jean receiving more training from Pyrrha, and perhaps acceptance that he's allowed to move on once he goes back. If I was writing this, that might be my angle if this was the direction I was given. To level up Jean a bit with Pyrrha, so that she can be the one who both started and completed his training. That's nice and cyclical. Also, I just really want Jean to go through a more mature arc and growth about Pyrrha's death, but that's just my preference, that doesn't mean it's going to happen. So, if you had Jean learning from Pyrrha, RWBY learning from Summer, Blake and Yang exploring their feelings, I guess that just leaves Weiss. She could see her dad again, perhaps, and grow from his death, and he can grow from what he's learned and realized since dying. That could be something. They connect as father and daughter, although people might rebel against trying to redeem Jacques, and I'm not really that excited about spending more time with him if that was the case. But you can do the whole, wasted life angle. He realizes what a waste it was, and he didn't have the love of his family, and he regrets it all now that he's dead. But, if you want to take that route. Although, if you want my pick, I would actually have her see her grandfather, Nicholas, and get his blessing for what she wants to do with her life and with the company in the future if they can ever rebuild it. And also, since he was an experienced and well-traveled traveled huntsman, he could then instruct her on more use of her semblance, please. That would be greatly appreciated, because despite her semblance being all over the place, she really needs help with it. But I'm actually going to make a whole video about that, so I won't get into it here, but I'm going to be exploring that soon. So for another time. But if you put all that together, that's something for everyone, plus added in attacks from someone like Neo, and them growing and bonding with her maybe to get her on side by the end. That might fill out a season a bit more, that's not bad. But still, it being extended into years seems somewhat unnecessary to achieve most of those things. You could meet with Summer and have your talk, you could have a small training session with Pyrrha over a few weeks or so forth, and it doesn't have to be years to achieve the same goal. The question is also of how long you'd want them to spend there. It is an issue. Be it dilated time, as in the time is moving differently on the island, or even if it just runs the same as Remnant, how long do we want them to be away? I wouldn't have them stay here any longer than 2 years. To see why, you can go see my original video on the timeskip, because I go into it there. Those 2 years are not really important to the people on the island, be they experiencing them or not. The 2 years is important to the people on Remnant. That's where the time passing more matters. It doesn't have to be dilated time. If they both spent 2 years equally, that's fine. But if you're going to lean into one, it makes way more sense to lean into the people on Remnant, because that's where that time really hurts. And honestly, on the island, I think 2 years is a little excessive if they had to experience all that time as well, which is why I thought it would be more likely to be dilated time, and it's only 2 years on Remnant and less time here. It's simply not needed to dilate the time here. The only thing you're then doing is just creating some weird separation between the guys on the island and the guys back on Remnant. Basically, you're giving the people on Remnant more of a lifetime to live separated from events, and then when they come back, it's been like, what, 5 years, let's say, the difference? And that's just a bit weird. Ruby's 23 now, the others would be 25, and their friends are still 18, and Oscar's 15. Those numbers don't really mean much when they're in a battle to save the world, but it's just weird for the sake of weird for no real gain. But especially if you dilate it the other way, if the people on the island go through long periods of time, but a lot less time passes on Remnant, what you're really doing most likely is robbing the characters of loss, the heartache, the pain of death. Not the guys on the island, but everyone left on Remnant. As it stands, they have no reason to believe their friends are anything other than dead. Yeah, they didn't see them stabbed, but they fell into an endless void that they were warned not to fall into, and the magic gate that led them there is gone. It's completely vanished. And Winter saw it all, including the place collapsing before she went out. It's gone, they must assume death or worse. There's no reason they would assume alternate realm. And if everyone outside back on Remnant believes that they're dead and that lasts for, say, a week, that's still bad and that would suck for them, but it really robs the long-term impact on those characters. Having to face that reality and that change for, say, a year or multiple years, that's a lot heavier. It's not a brief experience of sorrow and then, oh no, they're fine and they're back, we don't have to worry about that now. It's living with that reality, that weight. And then they have to fight without the main team too. People attack Vacuo, no Silver Eyes, no leader for Team Juniper. The rest of the team, RWBY, are also quite skilled, and they're not there to help either. It's a big loss, and that is good. It just doesn't mean that much the other way around. The people on the island can be sad missing their friends for a long time, sure, or worried about Salem or Cinder, what they might be doing while they're away, and they can't help. That's frustrating and annoying and sad, and they might be filled with despair. That's fair, and they can be depressed about it, assuming they'll never make it back and see their friends, and won't be able to help and do what they want to do. But they don't outright then think that their friends are definitely dead. It's all speculation. They're sad for themselves and worried for the others, but it doesn't quite equal what the others are going through, which is really assuming that the people they care so much about and would help save the world with them are dead and gone forever. I really think on the island arc, whatever it may be, the best you can sort of get out of it is becoming more competent. They can absolutely become better fighters, but they don't need years for that, because they can only advance up to the level of matching someone's Aterian, because they can't match up to someone like Cinder. They can advance some relationships, like Blake and Yang, that can be a thing, or if the dead are there, they can face their dead relatives and learn from that. That could be a big thing. They could maybe get a tool or a weapon to take back, like Jean getting a new sword that's really powerful, and find some secrets and discoveries. All of that doesn't take a huge amount of time. They can find info in this magical realm about dealing with people like Salem, some clue they need, that's great, but they can find it whenever you require them to. It doesn't require massive amounts of time to be necessarily believable. You just decide when you want them to find it or have that conversation. They can be there a month and clear all this pretty easily. I think they might be there longer than a month, but in reality, so long as it's not just a few days, all of those things are pretty reasonable, and you'd get away with however long you want to make it. And if you'd make it take significant chunks of time longer than that, it doesn't do much, it doesn't serve much of a purpose. You can say you want to feel earned like they went through a struggle, but you can have them here for 6 months, but having them here for like 5 years is not helping anybody and doesn't help the story much. While this video has been a bit scatterbrained, I think this sort of sums up my assessment of the concept. I saw a lot of people saying they thought the timeline on the island would be a lot longer than the time on Remnant. Yet going over all the potential gains and losses for the story, it just doesn't seem to do anything. Anything they can gain can mostly be achieved in a relatively short time and achieve all the same things, and the longer time spent on Remnant by those who think they're actually dead is beneficial to them. It serves the story and makes things harder for those left behind to keep fighting. And that is just better in terms of growth and hard challenges for them. Internal conflict on the island is fine, but by the end they all need to come together again anyway, so it has to be some kind of growth you can find in that conflict that's actually going to serve a purpose and not just be filling time. The power scaling can of course go up, they can become more skilled, their semblances can evolve, they can get more power, but it all happens relatively. And they also do that in the show quite quickly, they have little training arcs all the time that don't take up whole seasons. The best examples of that are their multiple montages on Atlas, and they weren't canonically there for years. And in the end it serves the same purpose, that they still can't match up to the major opponents at the end no matter how good they get at fighting, because that isn't the point. So in the end it's sort of a no-sum gain. That's the issue when you have a big bad guy who literally cannot be defeated by fighting. Which is why some self-discovery or gaining of new knowledge on the island can be a great thing to bring back, because that in itself is a weapon, but that doesn't require a huge amount of time to find or figure out, it's whenever you want them to. I'm aware this video sounds negative in tone, which isn't really the intent, it's simply me wanting to illustrate and explore the flip side of the concepts I brought up before, and why this just doesn't seem that likely to me. From a story level, I'm not sure there's much to be gained from it, but given those left behind on Remnant, returning in a small time frame actually does hurt them, so I think it's a bad idea. The only other viable option is to just blow the timescale way out on both ends, which I don't know how that helps either. Say they're gone from Remnant for a year or two so that they can deal with all the loss and still go through all that pain, you think that's fine, and then they return and it's been 15 years for the RWBY girls and Jean. And they're in their 30s now, with totally different lives, and relationships with each other have totally changed. But that doesn't serve much of a purpose except to massively disconnect the core group of characters from the situation they're returning to, that they left behind literally a lifetime ago. It'd be very shocking, but I don't think it'd be very useful. And that kind of time passing would be pretty evident to us watching the show. It would also make us disconnect with our characters, because we wouldn't be able to show 15 years of life too well in that time frame, and we'd be quite aware that when they return something weird's gonna happen because now we're dealing with 30-year-olds, say. That all pretty sums up my points. However, you may still disagree with me, and you're very welcome to do so. If you do disagree with me, please let me know why and what you actually think would happen and what the benefits would be versus the other versions of the story in the comments down below, because I do really want to know. This is a discussion for it. But that is all for now. Remember, time is like a surging river ever flowing onwards, so don't mess around in it too much or the story will get very tired and drown. Until next time, my name is Rigger, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.